They call themselves the First Legion, the Emperor's most loyal sons. But loyalty means something different when you're drowning in secrets. For 10 years, Brother Seraphon hunted traitors across the galaxy. He executed civilians, he burned evidence, he lied to his own brothers. And when they finally rewarded him with bone-white armor, he realized the truth. He wasn't being honored, he was being buried alive. I remember the first time I truly understood what it meant to wear this armor. It was not on the day of my elevation, nor during the trials that carved weakness from my flesh, nor even when I first gripped a bolter and swore oaths before the lion's silent statue. It was later, much later, on a world whose name I was commanded to forget, watching a child die because she had seen something she should not have seen. The bolt round left my weapon cleanly. The recoil barely registered against my armored shoulder. The girl's body struck the dust, and the secret remained safe. That was the moment I understood. Everything before had been preparation. Everything after would be consequence. My name is Brother Seraphon, and I am a dark angel of the First Legion, the Emperor's finest, the Lion's chosen, the sons of Caliban. For 10 years I have walked the narrow corridor between honor and necessity, between the oaths I swore to the Imperium and the deeper truths known only to the inner circles of my chapter. I have fought across 100 worlds, spilled the blood of traitors and Xenos alike, and never once faltered in my duty to the Emperor. But there is another duty, one whispered in the shadows of the rock, one that binds tighter than any oath sworn in daylight. It is the hunt for the fallen, the shame of our legion, the betrayal that must never be spoken, the sin that defines us more completely than any victory ever could. This is the story of how that duty hollowed me out. The war on Tertius Majoris began like so many others. Our strike cruiser translated into real space above a world choked with industrial haze, its forged cities belching black smoke into skies that had not seen stars in centuries. Orc warbands had infested the northern Manufactoria, and the Departamento Munitorum required those production facilities intact. We were to purge the greenskin filth and restore imperial governance within 3 standard months. The mission was clear, the enemy straightforward, and I welcomed the simplicity. There is a purity to fighting orcs that other wars lack. They do not surrender, they do not question, they exist only to fight and die, and we oblige them with the Emperor's mercy delivered at bolt shell velocity. I was a line brother then, part of Tactical Squad Amadeus, still young by Astartes standards though already bearing scars from a dozen campaigns. My armor was forest green, pristine save for the chapter symbol emblazoned on my shoulder. I had not yet learned what the bone-white armor of the Deathwing truly represented. I had not yet been told the stories that would come to define every waking moment of my existence. I was simply a warrior, grateful for the honor of serving the First, proud to walk in the footsteps of heroes whose names echoed through 10,000 years of history. Sergeant Amadeus led us with the calm precision I had come to trust. He was a veteran of 2 centuries, his face a roadmap of old wounds, his voice carrying the weight of experience that could not be taught in any chapter hall. We deployed via Thunderhawk into the heart of Manufactorum Delta 7, our jump packs screaming as we descended through the toxic atmosphere. The landing zone was a nightmare of twisted metal and burning promethium, orc bodies already piled high from the initial bombardment. The air tasted of copper and sulfur. The heat made my armor's temperature regulators work harder than usual. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the skeletal remains of factory towers that stretched toward the poisoned sky like accusing fingers. We fought for 6 days without pause, driving the orcs from hab block to production floor, clearing each structure with methodical brutality. I killed 43 greenskins personally, each death a small offering to the Emperor's glory. My bolt pistol never jammed. My combat blade sang as it opened Xenos' throats. I felt alive in a way that only combat can provide, every sense heightened, every movement purposeful. My battle brothers fought beside me with the synchronicity of a well-tuned machine, our training and augmentations transforming us into instruments of the Emperor's will. There was beauty in it, a terrible beauty that I have never been able to adequately describe to those who have not experienced it. On the 7th day, everything changed. We were consolidating our hold on the western sectors when interrogator Chaplain Asmodeus arrived aboard a storm raven that descended through the ash clouds like a black omen. I had seen chaplains before, of course. They were a constant presence in our chapter, their skull helms and rosarius beads as familiar as the sound of morning prayers. But Asmodeus carried himself differently. There was a weight to his movements, a deliberation that suggested every gesture carried meaning beyond the obvious. When he emerged from the gunship, the other brothers stood straighter. Even Sergeant Amadeus, who feared nothing I had ever witnessed, seemed to measure his words more carefully. Asmodeus called for me specifically. I remember the confusion I felt, followed immediately by a spike of irrational fear that I quickly suppressed. Had I failed in some duty? Had my conduct dishonored the chapter? I approached with the proper deference. My helmet maglocked to my belt, my face composed despite the questions burning behind my eyes. The chaplain regarded me in silence for a long moment, his gaze seeming to strip away armor and flesh alike, searching for something I could not name. Behind him, 2 members of the Deathwing stood in their bone-white Terminator plate, silent as statues, their storm bolters held at rest but radiating implied threat. "Brother Seraphon," Asmodeus said, his voice resonating from the vox grills of his skull helm, "you have been selected for special duties. Your service record is exemplary. Your faith is strong. Your loyalty is beyond question. These qualities will be tested in ways you cannot yet comprehend. Do you accept this burden willingly, knowing that the path ahead will ask more of you than any battlefield ever could?" I did not hesitate. To hesitate would have been to suggest doubt, and doubt was the first step toward damnation. "I accept, Interrogator Chaplain. I live to serve the Emperor and the Lion, not the Emperor," Asmodeus corrected, and though his tone remained level, the correction struck like a physical blow. "Not primarily. You serve the chapter first, the Legion first, the truth that we guard above all others. What I am about to tell you can never be unlearned. Once you know, you are bound by oaths more ancient than the Imperium itself. Do you understand?" I understood nothing, but I nodded anyway. That was when he told me about the Fallen. We stood in the ruins of a Prometheum refinery, surrounded by the corpses of orcs my brothers and I had killed. And Asmodeus spoke words that rewrote my understanding of everything I had ever believed. He told me of Caliban's destruction, of Luther's betrayal, of the Primarch's rage and the scattering of our traitor brothers across time and space. He told me of the hunt, the eternal quest to capture every single fallen angel and extract their repentance through methods the Inquisition would call extreme. He told me that this shame defined us, that every victory we claimed in the Emperor's name was secondary to the redemption we sought for sins committed 10,000 years ago. He told me that secrecy was paramount, that even our closest allies could never know the truth, that entire worlds could be sacrificed to preserve the chapter's honor. He told me that I would lie, deceive, and kill in service to this truth. He told me that I would bear this burden until death or damnation claimed me. He told me that this was the greatest honor the chapter could bestow. The words settled over me like ash from a nuclear winter, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to ask questions, to demand clarification, to understand how the noble chapter I had served could be built upon such a foundation of shame and secrecy. But Asmodeus was already moving on, explaining my new role with the efficiency of a man who had delivered this revelation many times before. I was to be assigned to the Raven Wing as support infantry, working alongside the swift-moving hunters who pursued leads across the galaxy. When the Fallen were cornered, when the moment of capture approached, I would be there to ensure no witnesses survived. No Imperial Guard regiments who fought beside us, no planetary governors who offered their support, no civilians who happened to glimpse the wrong thing at the wrong time. No one could know. The mission on Tertius Majoris continued for another month, but I was no longer truly part of it. Asmodeus attached me to his personal retinue, and we departed the main war zone on a quest that took us to the underhive levels beneath Manufactorum Epsilon. The Raven Wing had tracked a signal, an encrypted vox burst that matched patterns associated with the Fallen. It was tenuous, possibly a false lead, but we could not afford to ignore even the smallest possibility. We descended through kilometers of corroded infrastructure, past the forgotten masses who toiled in darkness, through air so thick with industrial runoff that even my rebreather struggled to filter it adequately. We found him in a chapel carved from rust and desperation. He was old, this fallen angel, his armor ancient and pitted, his face worn by centuries of guilt and survival. He did not fight when we surrounded him. He simply knelt before a crude altar fashioned from scrap metal, his hands folded in prayer, tears cutting channels through the grime on his weathered face. I had expected a monster, a cackling traitor drunk on chaos and corruption. Instead, I found a broken man who looked almost relieved that his running had finally ended. Asmodeus approached him with the calm of a predator that has already won. "Brother Zethaniel, you have been sought for 9,000 years. Your crimes are recorded. Your treachery is known. You will return to the rock and face repentance." The old warrior looked up, and his eyes found mine. I will never forget that gaze. It was not hateful or defiant. It was pleading, desperately human, in a way that Astartes are not supposed to be. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, just kill me. Do not take me to that place. I have prayed for the Emperor's forgiveness every day since Caliban burned. I have fought his enemies in the shadows, killed traitors and Xenos without glory or recognition. I am not the monster you believe me to be. Grant me the mercy of a clean death." Asmodeus struck him across the face with one armored gauntlet, the crack echoing through the chamber. "You do not deserve mercy. You deserve truth, and truth requires suffering." They took him then, the Deathwing warriors binding his wrists with chains inscribed with prayers of containment. Zethaniel did not resist. He simply wept, and the sound of his sobbing followed us as we ascended back toward the surface. But we were not alone in that underhive chapel. 3 workers had been present, menials who had been praying alongside the disguised Astartes, believing him to be some kind of holy hermit. They had seen everything. They knew that we had captured someone important, someone we wanted hidden. Asmodeus turned to me, his skull helm tilting slightly. "You understand what must be done." It was not a question. I drew my bolt pistol, and the workers began to scream. They were unarmed, weak, barely worth the ammunition I expended. The first round caught a woman in the chest, the mass-reactive shell detonating inside her ribcage and painting the wall behind her with red mist. The second man tried to run, and my shot took him in the spine, severing his body at the waist. The third, a boy who could not have been more than 16, fell to his knees and begged for his life in a language I did not understand. I shot him through the forehead, and his begging stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Asmodeus placed one hand on my shoulder, the gesture almost fatherly. "You have done well, Brother Seraphon. The chapter's secrets are safe because of your faith. Remember this moment. Remember that the mission is greater than any individual life, including your own." I nodded, because that was what was expected, and we left the bodies where they fell. No one would investigate. No one would care. The Underhive was a place where people disappeared constantly, swallowed by the darkness and forgotten by those who lived in the light above. 3 more deaths would not even register in the daily casualty reports, but I would remember them. I would remember all of them. The years that followed became a blur of similar moments, a cascade of compromises and cruelties that accumulated like sediment in my soul. We traveled from system to system, always following the whispered rumors of the fallen, always arriving too late or just in time, always leaving destruction in our wake. The Ravenwing operated with ruthless efficiency, their black-armored bikes screaming across battlefields while we followed in rhinos and land speeders, providing support and ensuring containment. I became skilled at what they called operational security, a euphemism for murder dressed in necessities clothing. On the agri-world of Thessia Prime, we tracked a fallen to a grain silo where he had been hiding among refugee populations fleeing an orc invasion. When we extracted him, 200 civilians had witnessed the operation. The Ravenwing called in an orbital strike on the silo complex, vaporizing everyone inside. The official report blamed orc artillery. The refugees became martyrs to the Imperium's defense, their names inscribed on monuments they would never see. I watched from orbit as the plasma lance turned night into day, and I felt nothing. The numbness had already begun. On the mining colony of Valdris III, we pursued a lead through tunnels that stretched deep into the planet's crust. The fallen we sought had taken shelter with a rebel group that opposed Imperial tithe collectors. They were not chaos-tainted, merely desperate people trying to survive impossible quotas. We killed them all anyway, because some had seen our target and others had heard his confessions. I personally executed the rebel leader, a woman named Cass, who had fought us with improvised explosives and fierce courage. She died calling me a monster, and I could not disagree. On the shrine world of Eremia Sanctus, we cornered a fallen who had been masquerading as a priest, offering genuine counsel to the faithful for decades. The local clergy loved him, children brought him flowers. When we dragged him from his chapel, the crowd that gathered tried to intervene, believing we were desecrating their holy place. We opened fire with bolters set to full automatic, and the crowd became a carpet of bodies. The ecclesiarchy declared it a Xenos-induced riot and sanctified the ground where the blood had spilled. I stood in that sanctified space and wondered if the Emperor could hear my thoughts, and if he did, whether he wept or simply turned away. Between missions, we returned to the Rock, that massive space fortress that served as both monastery and prison, mobile home, and eternal reminder of our shame. It drifted through the void like a tombstone the size of a small moon, its corridors filled with the whispered prayers of 10,000 years of guilt. I walked those corridors, attended the prayer services, maintained my armor and weapons, and tried to remember who I had been before Asmodeus spoke those first words in the ruins of Tertius Majoris. The trying became harder each time. The chaplains of the chapter were always watching, always evaluating, searching for any sign of weakness or doubt. Confession became a daily ritual, though the confessions were always carefully edited. I could not confess my growing horror at what we did, because that would suggest wavering faith. I could not question the necessity of our actions, because that would imply I valued individual lives over the chapter's sacred mission. Instead, I confessed minor infractions, small failures in combat, or momentary lapses in meditation. The chaplains listened with inscrutable patience, assigned appropriate penances, and sent me back into the cycle. But there were others who confessed true doubts, and they disappeared. Brother Matthias, who had served beside me in the early campaigns, began to question whether the hunt truly served the Emperor's will. He wondered aloud, in what he believed was a private conversation, whether our obsession with the fallen had become a form of damnation in itself. 2 days later, he was summoned to the Reclusium for spiritual counseling. I never saw him again. The official word was that he had requested assignment to a penitent crusade, seeking redemption through glorious death against the Imperium's enemies. I knew better. I had seen the librarians who specialized in memory alteration, their psychic talents bent toward erasing inconvenient truths from the minds of those who learned too much. Matthias had been erased. The knowledge settled in my chest like a cold stone, and I learned to smile and nod and never, ever voice the thoughts that screamed inside my skull during the quiet moments between battles. I became two people. The first was Brother Seraphon, loyal son of the Lion, dedicated hunter of the fallen, whose faith never wavered and whose trigger finger never hesitated. The second was someone I could not name, a ghost that haunted the spaces behind my eyes, growing stronger and more desperate with each passing year. Each body left to rot, each lie told to allies who trusted us because we wore the Emperor's colors. The Deathwing veterans watched me with approval during those years. I had proven myself capable of the necessary cruelties, demonstrated my willingness to place the chapter's secrets above all other concerns. They began to include me in briefings that ordinary battle brothers never attended, sharing details of the hunt's broader strategies, the patterns we tracked across space and time. I learned that the fallen were scattered not just across the galaxy, but across temporal anomalies created by Caliban's destruction, some of them emerging from the warp centuries out of phase with their original timeline. I learned that we maintained relationships with radical inquisitors who were willing to overlook certain irregularities in exchange for our support against demonic incursions. I learned that entire sectors of the Imperium had been deemed acceptable losses if their sacrifice meant capturing even a single fallen. I learned that we had abandoned brother chapters to their fates because extracting a captured fallen took priority over answering their distress calls. That knowledge lived in my mind like poison, burning slowly, impossible to purge. The campaign on Gaia's Reach marked the beginning of my final descent. It was a feral world, primitive by Imperial standards, its human population scattered across tribal communities that still worshipped the Emperor through half-remembered myths distorted by millennia of isolation. An orc wag had descended on the planet like a green plague, and the Departamento Munitorum requested Astartes' intervention to preserve the world's strategic value as a recruitment source. We deployed alongside the Angels of Redemption, a successor chapter that shared our genocide but not our inner shame, and the cooperation seemed to proceed smoothly at first. Then the Ravenwing detected a fallen presence in the Northern Territories. The Angels of Redemption noticed when we suddenly redeployed half our forces without explanation. They noticed when we refused to share intelligence about enemy movements in sectors we had declared pacified. They noticed when civilians who had been helping both chapters began to disappear from contested zones. Brother Captain Uriel of the Redemption confronted Interrogator Chaplain Asmodeus directly, demanding to know why we were operating with such extreme secrecy during what should have been a straightforward Xenos extermination. Asmodeus responded with bureaucratic deflection, citing chapter privileges and classified parameters. Uriel was not satisfied, and the confrontation escalated into a tense standoff that nearly resulted in Astartes firing upon Astartes. In the end, Asmodeus contacted the Rock and requested intervention from the Deathwing. A full company of Terminators deployed within hours, their arrival making it clear that the Dark Angels would not tolerate interference from even our genetic cousins. The Angels of Redemption withdrew from Gaia's Reach, their departure marked by barely concealed anger and suspicion. I stood on the landing platform and watched their strike cruiser burn toward orbit, and I knew we had made enemies of brothers who should have been our closest allies. The knowledge sat heavy in my gut, but there was no time to process it. We had a fallen to capture, and every moment of delay increased the chance of escape. We found him 3 days later in a cave system that wound through the planet's largest mountain range. Brother Thaladas, once of the First Legion, now reduced to a haunted fugitive who had been running for 9,000 years. He had integrated himself into one of the local tribes, teaching them improved farming techniques and basic fortification strategies to help them resist the orc incursions. The tribespeople revered him as a divine messenger, and when we arrived, they fought to protect him with spears and crude autoguns that had been passed down through generations. We slaughtered them without mercy. The Ravenwing bikers tore through their defensive lines, bolters reducing flesh to mist. The Deathwing Terminators advanced like unstoppable juggernauts, their storm bolters and power fists turning brave defenders into broken meat. I led a tactical squad in a flanking maneuver, clearing the cave entrances of anyone who tried to flee. Men, women, children, it made no difference. They had seen us, heard our conversations, witnessed our pursuit of the one they called the Sky Father. They could not be allowed to live. I killed 47 tribespeople that day, more than I had killed orcs on Tertius Majoris a lifetime ago. When the last screams faded, we dragged Thaladas from his refuge and bound him in consecrated chains. He did not rage or curse. He simply looked at the bodies of those who had tried to protect him, tears streaming down his ancient face. They were innocent, he whispered. They knew nothing of Caliban or the Imperium. They only wanted to survive. They knew you, Asmodeus replied, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. We called in an orbital bombardment on the entire region, scouring the mountains clean of any evidence that we had ever been there. The orcs would be blamed for the devastation, their savage nature providing perfect cover for our genocidal efficiency. The few Imperial observers on planet would accept the explanation without question, because who would suspect the Emperor's angels of such calculated brutality? As I watched the bombardment from orbit, something inside me finally broke beyond repair. It was not a dramatic moment, not a sudden revelation or crisis of faith. It was simply an exhausted surrender, the quiet acceptance that I had become something monstrous in service to ideals I no longer understood. The man who had proudly accepted his armor on the day of his elevation was gone, replaced by a hollow thing that wore his face and performed the expected rituals while screaming silently into the void. I began to dream of the people I had killed. They came to me during the meditation cycles, when my mind was supposed to be at rest, their faces rising from memory with perfect clarity. The woman on Thessia Prime, vaporized in nuclear fire. The rebel leader Cass, bleeding out in the tunnels of Valdris III. The boy in the Underhive, begging in a language I had never bothered to learn. The tribespeople of Gaia's Reach, defending their prophet with obsolete weapons and unshakable faith. They haunted me not with anger, but with questions I could not answer. Why were their lives worth less than our secrets? What redemption could be found in actions that would damn us by any moral standard? If we were the Emperor's chosen, why did our duty require so much that he would surely condemn? I could not ask these questions aloud, so I asked them in the silence of my heart, and received no answers except the continued orders that demanded more of the same. More planets, more hunts, more bodies piled in secret graves while we told lies to those who called us heroes. The 8th year of my service to the Inner Circle brought me to a dead system designated only as Sigma 77, a place where stars had burned out millennia ago and only frozen rocks remained. We had tracked a fallen to a research station built into one of those rocks, an Adeptus Mechanicus facility that studied the properties of dead stars and their effects on local warp phenomena. The fallen, a brother named Gavriel, had been working there as a security consultant, his true identity hidden beneath decades of false documentation and careful misdirection. The Mechanicus had no idea they employed a traitor. We arrived without warning, our strike cruiser translating into real space and immediately launching drop pods toward the station. The tech priests barely had time to register the attack before we were breaching their airlocks and securing key sections. They demanded explanations, their Binharik count sharp with confusion and growing anger. We provided none, simply securing the facility room by room, while the Raven Wing cornered Gavriel in the station's central computational core. I was with Asmodeus when we entered that core, a vast chamber filled with cogitator banks and hololithic displays that painted the darkness with streams of incomprehensible data. Gavriel stood at the center, his armor cobbled together from salvaged components, his weapons holstered in a gesture of surrender. He was young, impossibly young for someone who had survived since the heresy, and I realized with sick certainty that he must have been caught in some temporal anomaly that had displaced him forward through time. "I knew you would find me eventually," Gavriel said, his voice steady despite the fear I could see in his eyes. "I have prayed for this moment and dreaded it in equal measure. I am ready to face judgment for my crimes, but I ask one thing. The people here are innocent. The Mechanicus know nothing of my true identity. Let them live. Please." Asmodeus approached him slowly, almost gently. "You presume to negotiate? You, who betrayed your oaths and turned from the lion's light. Your crimes are beyond forgiveness, and the only question that matters is whether you will repent before we extract that repentance through pain." "I repent," Gavriel said immediately, desperately. "I have repented every day since I realized what Luther had done. What we had become. I was young and foolish, and I believed his words about the lion's betrayal. I know better now. I know the truth. I would undo everything if I could, but I cannot. So instead I have spent my life trying to serve the Emperor in whatever small ways remained available to me. I have killed his enemies in secret. I have protected his servants without recognition. I have sought redemption through anonymous service. Is that not enough?" "No," Asmodeus said simply. "It will never be enough. Your sin is not personal but existential. You threaten the chapter's very legitimacy by your continued existence. Every fallen we fail to capture is a potential revelation, a crack in the facade we have maintained for 10,000 years. You must return to the rock. You must face the truth of what you have done and what it cost, and you must never be seen or heard from again." They took him then, and Gavriel did not resist. though I saw tears cutting tracks down his young face. But his surrender was not the end of the mission. The tech priests had witnessed our arrival, heard our conversations, seen us capture someone they had believed to be a loyal Imperial servant. Magos Deltrian herself confronted us in the station's central atrium, her mechanized form bristling with indignation and questions we could not answer honestly. "Explain this intrusion," she demanded, her vox speakers crackling with mechanical fury. "You have violated Mechanicus' sovereignty, compromised sensitive research, and abducted a valued member of our security personnel. I require immediate clarification of your authority and intentions." Asmodeus attempted negotiation, offering vague references to chapter privileges and classified operations, but Deltrian was not some planetary governor who could be cowed by symbols of authority. She was Adeptus Mechanicus, priesthood of the machine god, and she demanded answers with the precision of someone who had devoted centuries to understanding truth through logic and evidence. The conversation spiraled into confrontation, and I saw the moment when Asmodeus realized that no amount of deflection would satisfy her. He signaled the Deathwing. The Terminators opened fire without warning, their storm bolters reducing Deltrian to scrap and sparking components within seconds. The other tech priests scattered, their screams modulated through vox units that turned panic into digital distortion. We hunted them through the station, clearing room after room, killing everyone we found: servitors, Skitarii, junior adepts who had been working on theoretical equations when we arrived. None were spared. The station's entire population, 93 souls bound to the Omnissiah's service, died because they had seen something they were not meant to see. I killed 12 of them personally, and I felt nothing. The numbness had become absolute. We scuttled the station when the killing was complete, setting reactor overloads that would consume the facility in nuclear fire. The official report would claim a catastrophic containment failure, a tragedy but not unexpected given the dangerous nature of the research being conducted. The Mechanicus would investigate, find evidence supporting the story, and file it away as one more acceptable loss in humanity's endless struggle for knowledge. No one would question it, because who would suspect the Dark Angels of murdering an entire research station to maintain a secret? On the journey back to the Rock, I stood in the chapel aboard our strike cruiser and tried to pray. The words felt hollow in my mouth, empty rituals performed by a creature that had forgotten what genuine faith felt like. I looked at the icons of the Emperor and the Lion, their faces rendered in gold and obsidian, and I wondered if they could see what I had become. If they could, did they approve? Was this what they had intended when they created the Legiones Astartes? Were we supposed to be executioners of the innocent, maintaining lies through mountains of corpses? I received no answers, only the continued silence that had become my constant companion. The chaplains praised my dedication. The Deathwing veterans nodded with approval. My service record grew thick with commendations for operations I could never discuss openly. I was being groomed for something, elevated through the ranks of those who knew the secret, brought deeper into the machinery that sustained the hunt across centuries and star systems. I should have felt honored. I should have been grateful for the trust being placed in me. Instead, I felt like a man being slowly buried alive, one shovelful of dirt at a time, unable to scream because the dirt was filling my mouth and nose and lungs. The 9th year brought me to a dead garden world called Elysium Mortis, where flowers that had once bloomed in 17 colors now grew in shades of gray and black, poisoned by industrial runoff from manufactoria that had been abandoned centuries ago. The local population survived by harvesting toxic blooms for export to chem laboratories across the sector, their lives short and filled with the kind of suffering that made death seem like mercy. We came hunting a fallen named Sariel, who had hidden among the harvest workers for decades, offering them small kindnesses while wrestling with his own damnation. We found him in a processing facility, surrounded by workers who had begun to suspect he was something more than human, but lacked the context to understand what. When we breached the facility, Sariel did not run. He simply stood in the center of the main floor, hands raised, surrounded by frightened people who looked at him with a mix of confusion and hope. Some of them were children, their hands stained with the black pollen of poisonous flowers, their eyes too large in malnourished faces. "I will go with you willingly," Sariel called out, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Just let them live. They have done nothing wrong. They know nothing of value. Please." It was the same plea I had heard from Gavriel, and it would end the same way. Asmodeus gave the order, and we opened fire. The workers died screaming, their bodies torn apart by mass-reactive rounds that had been designed to kill armored targets. The children died first, because they were closest to Sariel, and I watched them fall with the detached observation of someone watching events through thick glass. My bolter kicked against my shoulder, the familiar recoil grounding me in physical sensation while my mind floated somewhere far away. When the shooting stopped, the processing floor was a charnel house, blood mixing with black pollen to create a slurry that clung to our armor and stank of copper and rot. Sariel wept as we chained him, his tears mixing with the blood and pollen. "You have become the very thing we were created to destroy," he said, his voice breaking. "The Emperor made us to protect humanity, not slaughter the innocent to hide our shame. What redemption can there be in this? What honor?" Asmodeus struck him silent, but the words lingered in my mind like acid, eating away at the last fragile justifications I had been clinging to. We burned the facility to ash, called in more orbital strikes to obliterate the surrounding settlements, and told the sector authorities that a chaos cult had been exterminated before it could spread. The authorities thanked us for our vigilance and efficiency, never knowing that the true cult was us, worshipping secrets instead of gods. On the transport back to the rock, I stood in the armory and stared at my reflection in a polished section of bulkhead. The face that looked back at me was still technically mine, though I barely recognized it. The scars were new, earned in 100 battles I could not name publicly. The eyes were different, harder, and emptier than they had been a decade ago. But it was more than physical changes. Something fundamental had shifted, some essential piece of humanity that had been eroded away until only the hollow shell remained. I thought about Brother Matthias, who had questioned and disappeared. I thought about the people I had killed, their faces rising from memory in an endless parade of judgment. I thought about the fallen we had captured, men who wept and pleaded and spoke of redemption while we dragged them toward tortures that would make daemons envious. I thought about the lie I was living, the monstrous secret I helped maintain, and I wondered if there was any path back from the place I had traveled to. The answer, I knew, was no. There was only forward, deeper into the darkness, until the darkness was all that remained. The summons came in the 10th year, delivered by a chaplain I did not recognize, his skull helm pristine, and his armor bearing honors I could only guess at. I was to report immediately to the Grand Master of the Deathwing, an audience granted only to those being considered for elevation into the First Company. I knew what it meant. I had proven myself worthy of the Inner Circle's complete trust, demonstrated my willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect the chapter's secrets. The bone-white armor waited for me, a symbol of honor that felt more like a shroud. But first, there was one final test. The target was a shrine moon designated Penitent's Tear, a small celestial body that orbited a gas giant in the Ultima Segmentum. The moon housed a single monastery dedicated to a minor imperial saint whose name had been mostly forgotten by all except the few hundred monks who maintained his shrine. It was a place of quiet contemplation, far from the main trade routes, existing in peaceful obscurity that made it perfect for someone trying to disappear. We had tracked a fallen there through a series of intercepted Vox transmissions and correlative data analysis that took the librarians months to complete. His name was Zachariah, and he had been one of the first to fall, one of Luther's trusted lieutenants during the rebellion on Caliban. If the intelligence was accurate, he had survived 10,000 years through a combination of luck, skill, and careful anonymity. He was a prize beyond measure, a direct connection to the betrayal itself, someone who could provide information about the Fallen's broader organization and plans. The Deathwing wanted him alive for interrogation, but they also wanted absolute certainty that his capture would remain secret. That was where I came in. I led the mission personally, commanding a combined force of Ravenwing scouts and tactical squads drawn from the reserve companies. We approached Penitent's Tier with all stealth protocols active, our strike cruiser maintaining position at the edge of the system while we descended in unmarked Thunderhawks. The monastery sat in a crater at the moon's equator, a small complex of stone buildings surrounding a chapel whose spire reached toward the stars like a prayer given physical form. We landed under cover of darkness, the moon's thin atmosphere barely enough to carry sound. The monks were asleep, their routines as predictable as clockwork, their lives dedicated to prayer and maintenance of a shrine that almost no one visited. I deployed my squads in concentric circles around the monastery, ensuring that no one could escape once we initiated contact. The Ravenwing had already confirmed Zachariah's presence through thermal scans and biometric analysis. He was in the chapel, alone, engaged in what appeared to be private devotion. I entered the chapel alone, as protocol demanded. The interior was simple, almost austere, decorated only with a single statue of the saint and candles that cast flickering shadows across stone walls worn smooth by centuries of prayer. Zachariah knelt before the altar, his armor concealed beneath monk's robes, his head bowed in genuine supplication. He did not turn when I entered, though I made no effort at stealth. "I knew someone would come eventually," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I had hoped it would be the Inquisition, or perhaps a zealous cardinal who had discovered my true age and grown suspicious. Instead, it is you, my genetic descendant, come to drag me back to the rock and all its accumulated pain." I raised my bolter, keeping him in my sights even though he showed no signs of resistance. "You will come with me, Brother Zachariah. You will face interrogation and provide the information we require. Resistance will be met with force." He laughed, a sound without humor. "Resistance? From me? No, young brother, I have no fight left. I surrendered my weapons and my pride long ago when I finally understood the magnitude of what we had done. I am ready to face whatever judgment you wish to inflict. But first, tell me something. Do you truly believe this is justice? Hunting men across millennia, killing anyone who witnesses our shame, maintaining lies that corrupt the very foundations of what we were meant to represent? Is this what the lion would have wanted? The question struck harder than any physical blow could have. I had asked myself similar things in the darkness between stars, during the quiet moments when the numbness receded enough for genuine thought to emerge. But I could not voice those doubts, not even here, not even to a condemned traitor. The lion wants redemption for the First Legion. That is all that matters. "No," Zachariah said, rising to his feet slowly, his movements careful and unthreatening. "The lion wanted loyal sons who would protect humanity from the darkness. We have become the darkness instead, hiding in shadows and spilling innocent blood to preserve our reputation. You know this. I can see it in your eyes. You have killed for the secret, and it has hollowed you out just as it hollowed me before I finally fled. How many more will you kill before you admit that this hunt has become its own form of damnation?" I should have struck him silent. I should have dragged him from the chapel without engaging his poisonous words. But something in me, some last fragment of the man I had been, needed to hear what he would say. "You betrayed your oaths. You turned on your Primarch. You have no authority to judge what we have become." "I judge nothing except myself," Zachariah replied, spreading his hands in a gesture of openness. "I know my crimes. I live with them every moment of every day. But at least I have acknowledged them, sought penance through honest service, even if that service goes unrecognized. You, brother, you lie to yourself as efficiently as you lie to the Imperium. You tell yourself the killing is necessary, that the secret must be maintained, that you are serving the Emperor through your deceptions. But in the quiet moments, when you are alone with your thoughts, you know the truth. You are not hunting the fallen to redeem them. You are hunting them to silence them, and in doing so, you have become something far worse than they ever were." The words detonated in my mind like artillery shells, each one striking a foundation I had been desperately shoring up for a decade. I wanted to deny them, to explain the careful logic that justified our actions, to defend the necessity of what we did. But the defenses were crumbling. eroded by too many bodies and too many lies, and I found myself staring at this ancient traitor who spoke truths I had been avoiding since Tertius Majoris. "Please," Zachariah said quietly, and his voice carried no threat, only desperate sincerity. "Please, if you have any mercy left, if you retain even a fragment of the honor you swore to uphold, kill me now. A clean death, quick and final. Do not take me to the rock. Do not subject me to the dungeons and the torture and the slow erosion of everything I am. I will tell you everything I know about the fallen, give you every scrap of intelligence I possess, but grant me this one mercy. Let me die here, in this holy place, with the Emperor as my witness. I am ready." I stood there, bolt pistol raised, staring at a man who had lived longer than most civilizations and now begged for death as though it were the greatest gift imaginable. The decision should have been easy. I had orders. I had a mission. The Deathwing expected him alive, and my elevation to their ranks depended on delivering that result. Everything I had endured, every compromise I had made, would be validated by this single capture, but I was so tired of the lies, tired of the killing, tired of maintaining a facade that required me to murder children and burn research stations and tell the Imperium that we served the Emperor while serving only our own obsessive guilt. I looked at Zachariah and saw not a traitor but a broken man who had spent 10,000 years wrestling with the same questions that now consumed me. And I realized that the hunt would never end, that there would always be one more fallen to capture, one more witness to eliminate, one more secret to bury in mass graves. The hunt was eternal because we made it eternal, because admitting the truth would shatter the chapter's reputation and the carefully constructed lie that we were the Emperor's most loyal sons. We were not loyal, we were terrified, and our terror had made us into monsters. I lowered my bolt pistol slowly, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice rough. "Every detail about the fallen you know of, their locations, their plans, everything. And then I will decide." Zachariah spoke for 2 hours, providing names and coordinates and patterns of behavior that the librarians would have traded worlds to obtain. He told me about fallen who had integrated into Imperial Guard regiments, others who had joined Xeno's resistance movements, still more who had simply hidden in plain sight on backwater worlds where the Imperium's reach was minimal. He gave me everything he knew without hesitation or deception, his words flowing like a confession to a priest he trusted absolutely. When he finished, he knelt again, bowing his head. "Thank you for listening. I know it changes nothing, but it matters to me that someone heard the truth before the end. Do what you must." I raised my bolt pistol again, and this time my hand was steady. The decision crystallized with terrible clarity, and I understood that this moment would define everything that came after. I could take him to the rock, deliver him to the dungeons, and claim my place in the Deathwing while condemning this broken man to decades of torture in service to a secret that had already claimed too many lives. Or I could grant him the mercy he requested, kill him cleanly, and lie about what happened here. The choice was between the man I had become and the man I might have been. I pulled the trigger. The bolt round took Zachariah through the heart, the mass-reactive shell detonating inside his ribcage and ending him instantly. He died without pain, his body falling forward across the altar he had been praying at. Blood spread across the stone, dark and irreversible, and I stood there watching it flow while something fundamental shifted inside my chest. I had killed him not because he deserved death, but because he had asked for mercy, and I had decided to grant it. It was the first choice I had made in 10 years that was truly mine, not dictated by orders or the demands of the hunt. And in making that choice, I had crossed a line more significant than any I had crossed before. I had decided that my judgment mattered more than the chapter's orders. The realization should have terrified me, but instead I felt only a strange, distant calm. I looked down at Zachariah's body and realized that I had not saved him from torture. I had condemned myself instead, because now I would have to lie about what happened, falsify the mission report, and maintain that deception for the rest of my life. The Deathwing would demand explanations, the chaplains would investigate, Every word I spoke would be scrutinized for inconsistency, and I would have to be perfect. I called my squads to the chapel and told them that Zachariah had been killed resisting capture, that he had activated some kind of explosive device that destroyed his body before we could secure him. The lie came easily, smoothly, practiced from a decade of similar deceptions. My battle brothers accepted it without question, because I was their commander, and they trusted that I would never mislead them about something so important. They helped me burn the monastery to ash, eliminating any evidence that we had ever been there. The monks died in their sleep, never knowing why armored giants had descended from the stars to end their peaceful existence. I killed them personally, moving through their dormitory with bolt pistol in hand, executing each one with a single shot. They had seen us arrive. They had heard the commotion in the chapel. They could not be allowed to report what they had witnessed. The logic was identical to every other operation I had participated in, but this time it felt different. This time the killing was not in service to the hunt, but to cover my own decision, my own mercy granted without authorization. I had become exactly what the chapter feared most, a brother who placed his own judgment above the needs of the mission. But I did not stop. We departed Penitent's Tear, leaving nothing but cooling ash and radioactive craters. I filed my report through encrypted channels, describing a mission compromised by unexpected resistance and a target eliminated before capture could be achieved. I included enough technical detail to make the story plausible, enough regret to suggest disappointment at the lost intelligence opportunity. The Deathwing reviewed my report and expressed dissatisfaction but not suspicion. These things happened. The Fallen were resourceful. Sometimes they escaped through death rather than capture. The investigation lasted 3 months, librarians combing through every detail of my account, searching for inconsistencies or signs of deception. I maintained the lie with the same dedication I had once brought to the hunt itself, answering their questions with calm precision, never wavering, never allowing doubt to creep into my voice. I had learned too well how to deceive, and now I turned those skills inward, hiding the truth not to protect the chapter but to protect myself. In the end, they believed me, because the alternative was unthinkable. A dark angel lying to his superiors about a Fallen's capture was a betrayal beyond imagining, a corruption that would require immediate and extreme responses. Easier to accept that I had simply failed, that circumstances had conspired against success. They marked my record accordingly and moved on to the next hunt, the next target, the eternal cycle grinding forward without pause, and they elevated me to the Deathwing. The ceremony took place in the chapter's innermost sanctum, deep within the rock, where even the stone seemed to whisper secrets. Grand Master Ezekiel himself presented me with the bone-white armor, his ancient hands moving through rituals that had been performed for 10,000 years. The other Deathwing veterans watched in silence, their approval implicit in their presence. I was one of them now, initiated into the deepest mysteries, trusted with knowledge that could break lesser men. I knelt before the altar of the lion and swore new oaths, binding myself even more completely to the hunt and the secrets it protected. The words came easily, empty sounds that required no sincerity, only performance. I had become expert at performance, at showing the face expected while hiding everything true and broken beneath the mask. When I stood, clad in Terminator plate that weighed more than the armor I had worn for a decade, I looked like the ultimate expression of the chapter's dedication. Inside, I was already dead. The realization settled over me during the feast that followed the ceremony, while my new brothers celebrated my elevation and praised my dedication. I sat among them, consuming nutrient paste and recaf, listening to their stories of hunts completed and enemies destroyed, and I understood with perfect clarity that I had not been elevated at all. I had been imprisoned in a lie so complete that escape was impossible. Every day for the rest of my life, I would wake knowing that I had killed Zachariah not because orders demanded it, but because mercy required it, and that truth would eat at me like acid while I pretended to be the perfect instrument of the chapter's will. I was not being honored. I was being buried alive in duty I no longer believed in, but I would perform that duty anyway, because the alternative was to confess, and confession meant death or mind wipe or some fate worse than either. I had gone too far to turn back. crossed too many lines to find redemption through honesty. The path forward was paved with more lies, more killing, more secrets buried in the corpses of the innocent. And I would walk that path because it was the only one left to me. The hunt would continue. The fallen would be captured or killed. The Imperium would never know the truth about what happened on Caliban 10,000 years ago. And I would spend eternity maintaining that lie, watching it hollow out every brother who learned the secret, creating more creatures like myself who wore honor like a costume while dying inside. This is what it means to be a dark angel in the inner circle. This is the truth we guard more carefully than any fortress. We are not the Emperor's most loyal sons. We are the most desperate, willing to commit any atrocity to hide our shame. We hunt the fallen not to redeem them but to silence them, and in doing so we become the very traitors we claim to oppose. Every battle we fight, every world we save, every victory we claim is secondary to the obsessive preservation of a secret that has poisoned our chapter since its founding. I know this now with absolute certainty. I knew it the moment I pulled the trigger on penitent's tear and chose mercy over orders. I knew it when I lied to my superiors and watched them believe me because the truth was too terrible to consider. I knew it when I donned this bone-white armor and realized it was not a symbol of honor but a tomb I would inhabit while still breathing. And I will maintain the lie anyway, because I am too broken to do anything else. I stand now in my private chamber aboard the Rock, alone with my thoughts and the ghosts of everyone I have killed in service to the secret. The armor stands in its maintenance cradle, pristine and terrible, waiting for the next mission that will demand more blood and more deception. I look at it and see not protection but accusation, every plate a reminder of what I have become. The man who was elevated on Tertius Majoris is gone, replaced by something that knows only duty and the endless grinding necessity of the hunt. Tomorrow I will attend morning prayers and speak the liturgy of Caliban with perfect conviction. I will join my brothers in the firing ranges and the training cages, maintaining the skills that make us the Imperium's elite. I will receive my orders from the Grand Master and execute them without question or hesitation, because that is what Deathwing veterans do. I will lie and kill and deceive, and I will do it all with the calm efficiency of someone who has accepted their damnation. But tonight, alone in the darkness, I allow myself to remember Zachariah kneeling at his altar, asking for mercy he should never have needed. I remember the children on Elysium Mortis, their eyes too large in malnourished faces, dying because they had been near someone we wanted. I remember the research station burning in nuclear fire, 93 souls erased because they had witnessed an inconvenient truth. I remember all of them, every face, every name I learned or never bothered to ask, and I understand that they are the real price of our redemption. We tell ourselves, we hunt the fallen to restore the chapter's honor, but honor cannot be restored through dishonor. We tell ourselves the secret must be maintained because its revelation would cripple the Imperium, but the Imperium survives atrocities far worse than ancient betrayals every single day. We tell ourselves we serve the Emperor through our dedication, but the Emperor would weep if he knew what we do in his name. The truth is simpler and more terrible than any of our justifications. We maintain the hunt because stopping would require admitting that everything we have done in its service was wrong, that the mountains of bodies we have piled in secret graves were murdered for nothing more meaningful than pride. We cannot face that truth, so we continue, creating more murderers like myself, hollowing out generations of loyal warriors until they become shadows of what they should have been. This is the legacy of Caliban, not the betrayal itself, which was terrible enough, but the obsessive shame that followed. The desperate attempt to hide our failure that has transformed us into the very traitors we claim to hunt. We are fallen, all of us, every brother who knows the secret and maintains it through blood and deception. The bone-white armor is not a badge of honor, but a admission of guilt, worn by those who have proven willing to sacrifice everything noble about the Astartes ideal in service to a lie. And I will wear it until death claims me, because I have nowhere else to go. The hunt continues, the secrets multiply, the bodies pile higher in graves no one will ever excavate, and we tell ourselves we are heroes, the Emperor's most dedicated sons, while knowing in our hearts that we have become monsters wearing the faces of angels. This is the horror of being a dark angel, the slow corruption that eats at you from the inside until only the shell remains, performing the expected rituals while screaming silently into the void. I am Brother Seraphon of the Deathwing, and I am already damned. This is my truth, spoken to no one, recorded nowhere, existing only in the silence of my thoughts where the lies cannot reach. I will never speak it aloud. I will never acknowledge it to my brothers or the chaplains who monitor our faith. I will maintain the facade until my last breath, adding my voice to the chorus of deception that sustains the chapter across the centuries. And when I die, another will take my place, elevated to the Deathwing and initiated into the same terrible knowledge, beginning the same slow descent into moral dissolution that I have traveled. The cycle is eternal, because we make it so. The hunt will never end, because ending would require honesty we cannot afford. The lies will continue to multiply, requiring more killing to maintain them, creating more liars who must in turn be maintained through violence and secrecy. We are trapped in a mechanism of our own creation, grinding ourselves to dust in service to shame we can never overcome. And the galaxy burns on, unaware that some of the Emperor's finest champions are hollow men wearing stolen honor, maintaining secrets through methods that would horrify the very Imperium we claim to protect. This is what I have learned in 10 years of hunting the fallen. This is the truth that the bone-white armor conceals. This is the price of being admitted to the inner circle, of knowing the secret that defines our chapter more completely than any victory or valor. We are not redeemed. We are not heroic. We are desperate and terrified, and willing to commit any atrocity to hide our fear, and we call it duty. I stand in my chamber and prepare for tomorrow, when I will don the armor again and become the mask I wear for others. Brother Seraphon of the Deathwing, dedicated hunter, loyal son of the Lion, whose faith never wavers and whose trigger finger never hesitates. I will be perfect in my performance, because I have had 10 years to practice the lie. And somewhere deep inside, where the ghosts of my victims wait patiently, the real man will continue to die by degrees, ground down by the weight of secrets that were never worth the blood we spilled to maintain them. The Emperor protects, they say, but who protects us from ourselves? Who offers redemption to those who have committed sins so terrible that repentance is impossible? Who forgives the unforgivable when the crimes are hidden so deep that even confession becomes another form of betrayal? No one. We are alone with our guilt, isolated within the brotherhood that should have sustained us, trapped by oaths we can never break and secrets we can never share. This is the final horror of the inner circle, the realization that elevation is actually damnation, that the trust placed in us is really a prison, that the honor we sought has become the chains we wear. I am Deathwing now, and I will serve until death claims me, maintaining the hunt through whatever cruelties it demands. But I will never again make the mistake of believing that what we do is just, or necessary, or anything other than the slow suicide of a chapter that cannot escape its own history. We hunt the fallen because we are fallen ourselves, desperately trying to erase a shame that defines us more completely with each passing century. And in the end, when the last fallen is captured and the hunt finally concludes, we will discover that redemption was never possible, that we damned ourselves far more thoroughly than Luther ever could have, that the real betrayal was not what happened on Caliban, but what we became in response to it. But that end will never come, because we need the hunt more than we need redemption. We need the secret more than we need honor. We need the lie more than we need truth. And so we continue, generation after generation, creating more hollow warriors like myself, maintaining a facade that grows heavier with each body added to its foundation. This is the life of a dark angel in the inner circle. This is what awaits those who are deemed worthy of the deepest trust. This is the reward for dedication and faith and unwavering service to the chapter's cause. Not honor, but the certainty that you will spend the rest of your existence maintaining a lie that slowly destroys everything human about you. I have my armor. I have my oaths. I have my place among the elite, and I have nothing else.